That's the thing. I'm right in the middle of the exercise right now.
Oh, thanks. Real books, wow. Actual books.
Yeah, I know.
My goodness. Let's see if we can use both here.
Yeah.
Perfect.
There we go.
Thanks.
We have that one. Start right on the tip. All right. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. The two people you see here at the front of the room, Tony Wurst and Jacob Lilly, are the two top finishers in the class debate tournament that we had in Comp 325 Argumentation and Debate. So at the end of this, all of you are going to get to vote for who did the better debating. And I want to give you one little caution. Be real careful that you don't vote for the side you agree with. Vote for the debater who did a better job. So it could be that you don't agree with the side that the winner defended, but if they did the better job arguing, then they should be the one that you vote for. And my job is only to run the timer, and the time is on the screen. The speeches are strictly timed, and they have known the topic for quite a while. The topic is resolved that serving in the military violates biblical teaching. And with that, I am going to stop talking because you did not come here today to hear me.
All right. Well, I'll give a couple of definitions here. Serving is contributing in any way. Military, armed forces organized to defend states or coalitions of states. Violates is to break or fail to comply with. I'm going to just take this down while I speak. Biblical teaching are ideas and principles found in the Christian Bible. So what counts as evidence? Things from the Bible. What doesn't count is going to be things not from the Bible. All right. I'm going to give you 4 claims. Claim number 1. Military service is training for the use of violence against an adversary. Claim number 2. At one of the most crucial moments in his ministry, Jesus specifically commanded against the use of violence. Number 3. Teaching against the use of violence was a regular theme for Jesus. Claim number 4. His direct disciples understood his teaching to require nonviolence by their responses to violence against them. Okay, so I'm going to go back here and go through each one of these. Okay, that's not the right way. So military service is training for the use of violence against an adversary. So the primary reason for military is the use of force. And so if the primary reason for military is the use of force, then training for military service is training for the use of force. Okay? At one of the most crucial moments in his ministry, Jesus specifically commanded against the use of force to those who follow him. So in Matthew 26:51, he says, it says, "And behold, one of those who were with Jesus reached out, drew his sword, struck the slave of the high priest, and cut off his ear. And Jesus said to him, 'Put your sword back in its place, for he who lives by the sword shall die by the sword.'" So since Jesus commanded against the use of force, military service violates biblical teaching. Another claim here, teaching against the use of force was a regular theme for Jesus. So I'm going to give you several scriptures here. Matthew 5:8 says, "Love your enemies." You've heard that it was said, "Eye for eye and tooth for tooth," but Jesus says to us, "Do not show opposition against an evil person, but whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other cheek also." The fact of Jesus' conduct on the cross. Jesus teaches against advancing the kingdom of heaven by force in Matthew 11:12, where he said, "The kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force." So since Jesus' teaching is the ultimate source of biblical teaching, and he regularly taught against the use of force, then military service violates biblical teaching. All right, so his direct disciples also understood that his teaching to require nonviolence. Peter went back to Rome to volunteer for crucifixion, and Paul voluntarily went back to Rome willingly to suffer beheading. So last thing I'll say here is negative may try to play fast and loose with the idea that some military positions don't require violence, but I'll talk to you about that in my next speech. Thank you very much. said, oh, sorry.
So, in the story of David and Goliath, would you agree that it was the power of God that killed Goliath?
Yes.
But at the same time, action was required from David. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So, David used violence, and it was the intention of God. Through the will of God, David defeated Goliath.
Yes. David, the adulterer and murderer, killed another man. Correct.
Is David considered a righteous man at the end of his life?
Yes, David, the adulterer and murderer, was a man after God's own heart. But I would not agree that he is a Christian example.
Aren't all Christians sinners?
Yes.
Okay. So in the Gospels, specifically in the example that you mentioned, wasn't it Jesus who commanded the disciples to sell their cloaks to purchase those swords, which Peter cut off a man's ear with?
I am not familiar with that scripture. I can't answer that question.
Okay, well, it was directly before the passage you mentioned. And given the current state of the world, do you think a country is better off without the military?
I would answer that question by saying that there are standards that God has set. God's ways are not our ways. And therefore, even if we can't reach the standard, we still should be required to at least look at what God says.
So God's ways are not our ways, but would you agree that it was God who commanded the conquest of Canaan?
Would I agree that God required genocide in the conquest of Canaan? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes, I believe under the old covenant that there were things that God did that he would not do today.
So do you believe God changes all the time? Okay. Okay, so serving in the military does not violate biblical teaching. I accept the affirmative's definitions. So, argument one, military service is biblical by definition. So, first of all, there is no scripture that ever says military service is wrong, not one. But what we do know is that God has used military conquest to fulfill his purposes. The Old Testament records more wars than we have time to talk about, commanded specifically by God. These military campaigns are recorded in Joshua, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st Chronicles. Again, more than we have time to talk about. And certainly, God wouldn't direct so much military campaigns if he was actually against military and military service. That would not make sense at all. And secondly, if we look at the New Testament, so even if negative wants to argue that God has changed his mind, it is still prevalent in the New Testament. In Matthew 8, Jesus marvels at the faith of a Roman centurion. A Roman centurion was a military leader. And Jesus mentions nothing about his career. He doesn't say anything unfavorable about it at all. And it actually appears that this centurion is one of the faithful. And argument two, military service is fundamentally a good thing. So as Christians, we are not fans of war and violence. But in our fallen world, we sometimes must defeat that which threatens our lives and the lives of others. A good military fights for the sake of peace or to fulfill a greater purpose. And we know this approach can be perfectly biblical, as demonstrated by instances in the Old Testament, such as the conquest of Canaan. Some nations have used their power for evil, and we can effectively counteract that by fighting back. Let's not forget that in World War II, it was war that ended the genocide of the Jewish people. Several countries banded together and fought against evil, and this is biblical. Luke 10:19 says, "Behold, I have given you authority to trample on serpents and scorpions over all of the powers of the enemy, and nothing shall hurt you." And for this reason, I think there are instances where not only is military service permitted, but military service can even be encouraged. And I'd like to address the negative's position that the military is just about violence. So a good military isn't pro-violence, but they're prepared to defend. And I think it's more accurate to say defense is what the military is fundamentally about. We're prepared to fight because there will always be someone who wants to hurt us. We don't instigate violence, but we're prepared to respond to those who do. And also, let us not forget that there are countless military positions that have nothing to do with violence. The negative anticipated that, but the affirmative. But I can be a doctor, I can do clerical work, I can be a Christian military chaplain. I don't have to contribute to violence if that's my choice. And that is my time.
All right. I noticed that you seem not to have any testaments from the New Testament that teach in favor of violence as a prescriptive response. Why is that?
Well, violence is never favored. It's just simply something that may occur in certain circumstances. The Bible is not pro-violence, but that's not to say violence is never necessary.
Okay. Do you know of any verse from Jesus or the apostles which encourages the use of violence via military service?
Encouragement, absolutely not.
Didn't both Jesus and Paul redefine the way war is interpreted in the scriptures by their teachings such as, we wrestle not against flesh and blood in Ephesians, my kingdom is not of this world, if my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, from John 18:36?
I apologize, I just have to clarify. Are you asking if war references in the New Testament actually reference spiritual warfare?
Yes, I'm actually, I'm saying that didn't Jesus, both Jesus and Paul, redefine the way we interpret war in the New Testament?
Redefined completely? No. I think there is warfare metaphors in the New Testament, but there are both spiritual warfare references and literal warfare references.
So there are literal warfare references in the New Testament. Is that what you're saying?
Perhaps not in the New Testament.
Okay. How is it that you explain the fact that Jesus and the apostles taught against violence both in their writings and by their conduct, yet you still oppose the resolution?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
How is it that you explain the fact that Jesus and the apostles taught against violence both in their writings and by their conduct, yet you still oppose the resolution?
Well, once again, violence is not preferred, but there are circumstances in which violence is permitted, and I will get to that in my case.
Thank you. Okay, so just to be clear, I'm affirmative, he's negative. So the negative has failed to recognize several things. He has failed to recognize the impact of the work of the Prince of Peace, which is exemplified in his response to Pilate's attempt to acquit him in John 18:36, wherein we find the scripture that says, Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I would not be delivered to you, but my kingdom is not from here. Failure to recognize the impact of the New Testament teaching about the characteristic of warfare under the new covenant, embodied in Ephesians 6, which says our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against powers, against principalities, against the rulers of this dark age. So in stating that not all jobs involve hurting someone, negative concedes that violence is not an acceptable Christian practice, and possibly showing that even negative believes that violence violates biblical teaching. And if violence violates biblical teaching, then is that not to say that military service violates biblical teaching, because the only reason you have a military is to effect violence. And so what we have today is to decide, are we going to go with the standard that Jesus lifted up for us? Are we going to hope that one day we can reach for it? We're not asking today that you vote in affirmative, so that a vote for affirmative is not a vote to defund the military. A vote for affirmative is a hope. A vote for affirmative is a prayer. It's a wish that one day we will attain to that great hope, to that great standard that Jesus set up for us. So let's look at several things that negative brought up. We already talked about military is not always violent. He says that God chose great military leaders in the past to be examples. Now, I think that it's not too much for me to say that we probably wouldn't want to model our lives and character and practice after the likes of Saul and David and Samson that he brought up. We all know, you can just think for 10 seconds about many things that you would not want to model your life after in those men. And of course, they are the yin and the yang. They do have both good and bad. But we've got to choose. And negative has to give us a way to choose. What are we going to follow? Which ones are we going to follow? Which ones are we not going to follow? So I'll look for that in his responses. He says that God trains us for war, but Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. And Jesus and Paul both reset the way we interpret the idea of war in the New Testament. Jesus doesn't look for a world filled with war. Jesus looks for a world of peace. He is the Prince of Peace. And I assert to you today that he is looking for a kingdom of peace. Thank you. What was it? Oh, that's right.
So, in light of your position, how do you believe in modern times is the correct Christian response to an event such as the Holocaust? How should other nations respond to that?
How should other nations respond to the Holocaust? Since I am not in 1950 or the 40s, isn't the 40s the Holocaust? I think that it's going to be hard for me to say today how we ought to act then. I am not talking about the past. I am talking about the future. The future, will we all agree with Jesus? Will we go with his teaching? Will we be the people that he hopes that we will be?
Would you agree that it is our biblical history, it is our past which informs how we should behave in currently and in the future?
No.
So let me get this straight. Are you saying we should not use the Bible to inform how we should live today and tomorrow?
No, you asked if the past should inform. I'm saying that not everything in the past is something we want to repeat.
But if it is out of the Bible, if it is a biblical standard, something which occurred in the past, is that generally something that is valuable, that is good to replicate in our lives today?
Well, the Bible's a big book. Generalization is hard. That's how I'll respond to that question.
Okay. And that is, I concede my time. I'm so sorry. I'm having trouble navigating. Okay, firstly, I'd like to respond to the affirmatives, first constructive, where he talks about how we are called, Jesus has called us to turn the other cheek. And this argument will kind of help to give us a fuller picture of what the provisions on self-defense and violence are using the New Testament. So we are called to turn the other cheek. Scripture does advocate this, but this is not a command which applies to all types of conflict. And this command, because this command is directed at the individual, it does not apply to matters of the military, and I will prove it with Scripture. So in Romans 12:19, Paul says, "Never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God." But later in Romans 13:4, when Paul is literally talking about the governing authorities, as in the government, Paul says, "For he," the government, as in the government, "is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer." So this, in Romans, we are given a fuller picture of exactly how we deal with the issue of violence, that on an individual basis, we are called to love our neighbor, to not exact retaliation. However, in Exodus 22, we are permitted self-defense conditionally. It says, if a thief breaks into your home in the night and the homeowner kills the intruder, they are not guilty of bloodshed. So, but if it is in the daylight, then they are guilty of bloodshed. And this teaches us that self-defense is permitted. Lethal self-defense is only permitted if it is absolutely necessary, if it is your life or their life. But when we're talking about the government, here in Scripture, as you can see, the government is given the authority to act as an avenger against a wrongdoer, and these commands complement each other. And it should also be noted that there are instances, such as in David and Goliath, where for God to exact vengeance, that may still involve you. It was made clear to the nation of Israel that they were winning wars by the power of God. It was the strength of God that killed Goliath through David. And I should also note that on the issue of Jesus rebuking Peter and the sword, so in the gospel account of John, after Peter strikes the man's ear off, Jesus says, he rebukes him and says, "Sheath your sword. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given to me?" He rebukes him not because he acted with violence. He rebukes him because he stood in the way of the cross. And that is my time.
That's it. Thank you. The last thing that you said, that Jesus was responding to the person that cut off the sword of the guard, was that he was standing in the way of the cross. Why do you think it would be that he said, "He who lives by the sword shall die by the sword"?
Because it is also said that he who loves violence is evil. It is not the same thing. Using violence and loving violence are two different things. Living by the sword indicates that you take pride in violence. Christians do not take pride in violence.
Okay. Let's see. You mentioned that in Exodus 22 that we are permitted self-defense. And are you asserting to us that the Old Testament law is still in place?
Lots of Old Testament laws are still in place, not the entire thing. We know that Jesus fulfilled the law, and not everything in the Old Testament is to be done away with.
Okay, so are you prepared today to give us a standard by which we can measure that for each individual Old Testament scripture?
That's not necessary at all. Again, the New Testament indicates that, well, first of all, it never says anything about the removal of that law or that warfare is totally, off the table now.
I apologize. I'm going to interrupt you because this is my time. I asked you if the well, now I forgot my question. I'm going to another question. Are you aware of the military term known as tooth-to-tail ratio?
I'm not.
Okay, thanks. Oh, it's my speech. Yeah, that's right. Okay. I am resting my case on the fact that Jesus and the apostles imagined a different future for us. That they imagined that one day there would not need to be a military. That one day in Jesus' kingdom there would not need to be use of force, one man, one woman upon another. I'm resting my case on that philosophy as interpreted through the scriptures. And the scriptures that I want to bring up again are, if someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to him the other also. The other scripture, if Jesus says, "If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight. Put back your sword into its place." Paul said, "We struggle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, rulers of the darkness, and spiritual forces of the wickedness in heavenly places." Okay, so negative wants you to believe that turning the other cheek does not apply to the military. I'm interested in his answer to this question. How is it that we are to use, what standard are we to use in interpreting scriptures? Because he seems to have different interpretations. Some Old Testament scriptures are okay, but some are not. Some New Testament scriptures are okay, but some are not. I want to hear a clear definition. I'm giving you a clear definition today. I'm asserting a clear and defined stance, which is that there is a better future for us, which does not include a military. And again, I'm not asking you to defund the military. I'm asking you today to vote a wish and a prayer and vote along with your gut feeling that someday we don't have to take up arms against each other. Thank you very much. There's no more comments, right?
the military service is fundamentally a good thing because defense is a good thing. It would certainly be nice if there were no need for force. It would certainly be nice if there were no need for military. I am not in disagreement with that fact, but so long as the world is fallen, there will be violence, and as Christians, we are permitted to respond to that. We do not love violence, but we are permitted to respond for our own protection and for the greater good, to correct oppression, to prevent harm upon others, upon our families. We only fight to protect. We do not fight because we love fighting. That's not Christian at all, and that's not my position. Once again, in the New Testament, I will remind you of another centurion named Cornelius. Verses 1 and 2 of Acts 10 says, at Caesarea there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion of what was known as the Italian cohort, a devout man who feared God with all his household, gave alms generously to the people, and prayed continually to God. This is straight from Luke, the apostle. It is said that this centurion, this military leader, similar to the other centurion who was mentioned, was a devout man. Now, when Scripture talks about other careers, for instance, a tax collector, it is made evident that that is an unfavorable career. They are mentioned among sinners. They're mentioned among thieves and drunkards. Never is the career of a soldier mentioned in such a light in the New Testament. So even if you were to disregard Old Testament passages, the New Testament still affirms that there is nothing wrong with serving in the military. It can be a very virtuous career. And warfare is ugly, but again, we fight to protect, and sometimes it is necessary. And on that, I rest my case.
Again, I am resting my case on the fact that there's a better future, that we are called by Jesus to imagine a different future. Negative wants you to believe that Jesus said to the centurion that he's never seen such great faith with this guy. And I think he wants you to leap. This is called an assumption. He makes a giant logical leap from the faith to the centurion's occupation. I'm not really sure how those two things connect. I don't think they do. I don't think Jesus was by saying that, how great is your faith? I don't think he was saying, how great is your faith? I'm glad that you're a centurion. Now go kill some people. I don't think that he did that. Okay, so he says, Negative says, that we are permitted to respond in violence. I don't really see that in the New Testament. I know that we all know that the Old Testament is not completely gone, but that there's a change. When Jesus did his work, there was a change. And Negative's stance doesn't respect the impact of Jesus' work and from the apostles, their teaching, and what they did by their lives. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I'm not asserting a plan that we defund the military. I'm only asserting that we agree with Jesus' teaching and the apostles' teaching. So let's see. I have one more up here, but I'm probably not going to get to it. I'm going to concede. Thank you.
So let me tell you what is going to happen now. We are going to ask in a moment, not yet, we're going to ask Tony and Jacob to step out to the hallway so that you don't vote in front of them, because that could be really uncomfortable. Then when the votes are counted and they step back in, I am going to tell you a little bit of the backstory of this debate just to ratchet up the tension a little bit. Then I am going to announce who the winner and therefore the Bushnell debate champion is, and then we are going to have a time of questions where you can ask them about the arguments they made in this debate if you want. You can ask them questions about how debate works. You can direct those to me as well. That's what we're going to do with the balance of our time. So, without further ado, Tony, Jacob, go away. Let me see. We have 2, 4, 6, 7, 9, 11, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. We have an odd number. That's perfect. We have 21 people. So, raise your hand and keep it up until I say put it down if you think Tony won the debate. Nice and high. Can't do it timidly because I can't count. Okay? Raise your hand nice and high, and you can put it down. Very well done, Isabel. Raise your hand nice and high and hold it up if you think that Jacob won the debate. Okay. Okay, we're ready for you. So there are two bits of backstory. One of the things that you should know is that every time this class has run, the class tournament has culminated in a championship debate on Ace Day. There's always been one debater in the class who was undefeated and came into Ace Day as the top seed and the heavy favorite. And the past 3 times we've done this, it was Katie Noel, Brad Keller. Last year it was Evan Zubich. Did I do that right? Okay. Katie Noel was the top seed. Nick Rodriguez was undefeated. And then Evan Zubich was undefeated. And all 3 times the undefeated one lost. The other bit of backstory I want to give you is Tony went through the class and just manhandled everybody. I mean,
I was nice.
he was nice, but all the wins were lopsided. Chase, Jasmine, is that fair? Yeah, it was. But on the other hand, what we do, they're taking a test tomorrow, so yesterday we reviewed and we played Jeopardy, and Jacob just turned the entire class into roadkill.
Oh, man.
So
He wasn't nice.
So this is a grudge match. We had the big win in the debates against the big win in Jeopardy, and this is the playoff. And I now get to announce that on a vote of 14-7, once again the undefeated person has been defeated, and the Bushnell debate champion is Jacob Lilly. Okay, questions for the debaters about positions they took or about debate? And I'm going to stay up here in case any questions are for me.
So for your final argument, you kept saying in the future, and one day we won't need a military, but what would you say about today?
Well, I tried to get all my uncles. I have blood in my family in every American war of the 20th century. Wow. And so, I'm sorry, I'm taking that. I'm just going to be eating it if I talk through it. So, I believe firmly in military. The problem for me was I had to choose this, or I had to choose to vote for the proposition that the COVID lockdowns were not worth it. So I chose this one thinking that you lot would maybe not like the military. I was wrong.
Other questions?
Jacob, you talked about Romans 13. Can you talk about that point again and how it kind of connected
Here.
here?
Yes, I will. Let me pull that up. Yeah, so I was saying basically that, so we have this command in Romans 12:19, which says, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. But then one chapter later in Romans 13:4, in context in this passage, Paul is talking about governing authorities, like he's talking about government, or exactly, some details about government. I wish I had it in front of me, he says, for he, referring to the government, is God's servant for your good, but if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. And I was just saying there's kind of a duality situation here where we individually have a command to never avenge ourselves to wrongs done upon us. And this is especially in reference to kind of petty things. But then when talking about the government is given authority different from what we have as individuals. So I guess that was my point there. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, please let me know.
No, that's
I have a question I want to ask to the audience, and specifically to the person in the front row all the way on the left. Was this good arguing?
very great.
It is Jess approved. Okay, who else has, well, in case you weren't here, Jess just did a session on argumentativeness and debate and about how it's a good thing. So, okay. Who else has a question for our debaters?
So Tony, more along the lines of like ethics and like morality, and I'm curious why, since the majority of wrath that is enacted by God is technically out of corrective love, why you didn't push any points of love through the idea of military and protection.
Yeah, truthfully, I had some points in here, but I completely over-prepared and my guide was really hard to navigate. So I had stuff like that, but honestly, some of it got lost as I came out. I did, I had some ideas worked out about how defense is in relation to love. It is loving to crush what is evil in a way, and but yeah, I didn't get to it.
Okay, that's totally fine. I was just curious. Cool.
That would have been fun to go back and forth on. I'll respond how I would have responded. I would have said, I would have said something like, I'm a believer in annihilationism, so I believe that the lake that burns with fire is something that eliminates the soul of the person who is not going to end up living forever. And so I would say something like the fact that Jesus doesn't want violence in heaven, and so I would go along those lines. And I don't know that there's going to need to be discipline. There may be in heaven, but I would kind of just go back to the standard. Jesus didn't. He turned the other cheek. He didn't resist violence. And I'm not saying that we have the answers, but wouldn't it be a nicer future?
What other questions do we have?
I have a question for Jacob. Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, hi, I didn't even see you, Isaac. Hi.
So it seems that in Jesus's ministry, he always met immediate needs and then addressed needs of the heart. So are we as Christians supposed to kind of copy that kind of role model through Jesus of just addressing what's in front of us, or are we called to do something more than what Jesus did? And of course, agreeing with Jesus' teachings.
That is a big. So I think yes, Jesus is always the ideal, role model. We can never do what Jesus did, but like whatever the values Christ demonstrated, we do our very best to understand what those are and replicate them in our own lives. I hope that answers your question, kind of. I don't have all of the exact answers. Even all the arguments I produced are not 100% like reflective of everything I truly believe. It's just like for the sake of the argument.
Yeah, let me chime in on that too, Jacob, because one thing that you guys didn't know is that this argument set was done several weeks ago, and so what happens is we all make our arguments and we put them on a shared spreadsheet. And you cannot add arguments. I hope you didn't add any arguments.
I did not add. Well, unless it was a response to a constructive argument.
That's totally fine. But so anyway, that constrains the arguments both ways. So whatever I argued was something that we created and were constrained by time, and so was his. There was another question over there.
Oh, yeah. Well, just like there's a lot of talk about the Old Testament, and I kind of feel like there's almost some confusion maybe about like between the two of you about like what is carried over from the Mosaic Law into the New Testament. So I'm just kind of curious how both you guys would land on that, because I feel like it kind of informs your interpretation of this topic.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. I just forgot half your question.
That's fine. It was long. Basically, how much of the Old Testament do you think carries over into the New Covenant?
Yeah. Okay. So it's difficult to say off the top of my head. I'm kind of a person who prepares my thoughts before delivering them. But okay, I will say, as a general rule of thumb, it generally works to believe that everything that is affirmed in the New Testament regarding the Old Testament stands. I know there is controversy on certain issues about is that still in effect or is it not? I kind of partially wanted to avoid getting too deep into that conversation for this, because again, time constraints, and there's a controversy there in itself. Yeah.
I think also that the way I would respond to that is from Acts, where the leaders of the church, Peter and the guys, got together and said, okay, we've got this same controversy, what carries over? And they said, okay, well, don't eat things that have been sacrificed to idols, and don't drink blood, and abstain from. I would go with that letter, and I would say that that probably embodies, if anything, that's the same controversy that we're talking about now was dealt with by the apostles, and so I would go with that and say everything else is kind of, maybe a weak string to hang a heavy thread on.
Lingering questions? I have 2 plugs. Well, I have a summative comment and then 2 plugs. The first is, I'm very proud of both of them. I thought this was an extremely good debate. Can we appreciate them one last time? 2 plugs. Jess mentioned join the debate team. We actually have one, believe it or not. Tony is on it, if I'm not mistaken. You should be on it too, because you can learn to react that quickly to unexpected twists and turns, and even to put on a spirited defense of a set of arguments that you do not believe, which I gather what Tony was doing today. The second plug is, if you want to go take a break and come back in 20 minutes at noon, we are going to have the State of Teaching of Bushnell University with the Birthplace Laureates. It'll be a discussion of what is happening in classes that helps people learn, what's happening that doesn't help people learn, what could happen but isn't right now that would help more. And if the laureates don't take all their time, there will be time for comments from the floor, and you could chime in too. That's happening at noon. Thank you all for coming.
Well done, man. Great. Good job. Good job on holding position.
That's 4